All right. He's a riot. That's the focus of tonight's angle. All right, so much for Kamala's pivot to the middle. Remember that? Well, today, the Democrat cabal, as Speaker McCarthy just said, doubled down on radicalism. Now, since we all know that Harris wouldn't win one state other than maybe Minnesota in a real Democrat primary, maybe Kamala's Tim Walz pick makes sense. But last year, as inflation was crushing Minnesota families, this was Tim's priority.
We want every Minnesotan to grow up feeling safe, valued, protected, celebrated, and free to exist as their authentic versions of themselves. Protecting and supporting access to gender-affirming health care is essential to being a welcoming and supportive state to the community.
I have people in my DMs who are saying, you better do this because we're moving already to Minnesota because we don't know where to go.
Yes, Kamala Harris's running mate believes kids who are too young to get a drink at a bar are mature enough to have their genitals mutilated by a twisted surgeon. But, as they're calling him, Tampon Tim insists that the real evil exists in other states that ban the barbarism.
Students who are understanding are trying to understand who they are as their gender identity is being developed. They are most at risk. We're there to protect children. We're there to have you understand that in Minnesota you're going to be protected.
Protecting and supporting access to gender-affirming health care is essential. We know this urgency is real, thus the need of an executive order today.
Well, the only thing worse than a San Francisco liberal trying to vibe her way past her record is a Minnesota liberal trying to rebrand his.
Tim Walz, I know very well. He served in the House. To characterize him as left is so unreal. It's just not what the question. He's right down the middle. He's a heartland of America Democrat.
Yeah, he's more in the middle than France and England, countries that have banned gender-affirming care, so-called. Well, the heartland by birth, but Haight-Ashbury by his record, Tim Walz, this isn't flying. The far left is jubilant tonight. He's Bernie Sanders, but with a National Guard stint and a few decades younger. Progressives unleashed a furious pressure campaign over the past few weeks. I'm not sure if you noticed, but it was rooted in this vague whiffs of anti-Semitism. To kill Josh Shapiro's chances of getting the nod, you had to bow down to the progressives. This is deeply disturbing, and we're going to dig into this more in a few moments. And remember, if the squad is happy and they are ecstatic that Walz is the choice, you should grab your children and watch your wallet. Because if Harris and he end up in power, you're going to need to do a lot more to protect both. Because for Governor Walz, being a socialist just means being a good neighbor.
Don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness. Just do the damn work.
If America hoped that Kamala Harris's running mate was going to temper her far-left instincts and maybe even reassure an anxious nation, you might remember how things looked over Memorial Day weekend 2020 in Minneapolis. The aftermath of the George Floyd shooting did hundreds of millions of dollars of damage to the city. And instead of taking charge, Governor Walz at the time essentially empathized with the rioters.
We saw large, peaceful protests focusing on the systemic changes that get to the heart of why we're in this situation. And when I say we, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the state of Minnesota, nationally, and as we've seen over the last 24 hours, internationally. A society that does not put equity and inclusion at the center of it is certainly going to eventually come to the places where we're at.
When they were taking over and then burning parts of the liquor store, destroying a small business, was that part of the DEI, failures of the country? But his failure to lead and call in the National Guard earlier allowed neighborhoods and small businesses to burn.
My husband was asleep, and I went and woke him up. I go, you need to wake up now. I go, Town Talk's going to burn down any minute. And we sat there and watched it just melt to the ground, all our hard work.
It started with people with bats entering, people pushing on the front windows, and then hundreds of people went in and they looted, not for an hour, 2 hours, 5 hours, and then they came back the next night and the next night, 6 fires, and it's unbelievable.
Yeah, the Ingram angle was on the scene doing that reporting year after year. That was just a few months after the riots. And as for that 3rd police precinct right down the road, it was burned by the rioters and is still abandoned. Thoughts looking at the old 3rd police precinct building 3 years after the riots?
It brings back a lot of bad memories for certainly myself, but also obviously the police officers that once worked out of this facility. So it's just sad to see here we are 3 years later and literally nothing has changed. The activists and some of the city council members who are also activists themselves consider it a victory not to have police in the precinct because some of the city council don't want police to begin with.
Don't want police to begin with. But wait a second, we got to be fair tonight. What about Governor Walz's great policing reforms? How are those working out?
Harris says his department is short more than 200 officers.
You've lost 40% of your force in the past 4 years. That sounds like a big problem.
It is incredible. It's not just that we lost 40% of the force. They've been facing the highest levels of crime and violence in some categories that the city has ever seen.
Walz has helped tank law enforcement in his state, and he's on his way to tanking education as well. You heard a lot tonight about his experience as a public school teacher, and that sounds lovely. But he's forgotten whatever sense he learned, and now it's all DEI all the time.
We can't find a teacher that looks like the kids they're teaching. You don't need another one that looks like me. You need somebody who's in there. All the research shows that.
All the research? Oh, really? Well, I want to see that research. Naturally, with this loopy focus of his, Minnesota's just going in the wrong direction. In its national education ranking, it's dropped now to number 19. But let's look at the bright side. At least the boys can use the girls' bathrooms and get free tampons. Isn't he a riot? And that's the angle.